So it's been a while since I made a discussion video like this talking about the game industry and where I think everybody is at, and I kind of want to do that for today's video. Originally, I was going to try and upload a video about me talking about the Nintendo Switch 2, but honestly, I figured that this topic is a lot more important than the Switch 2 because after seeing what has unfolded in the last week or so, I figured this is far more important and this definitely worries me going forward. So, I want to have a discussion with you folks talking about the future of the gaming industry and how it still worries me and how it's starting to, in a way, scare me going forward. So it just seems like every time I log into the internet, I just see something new every day when it comes to talking negative about video games. And then we have more of these AAA companies just resorting to live services and they're trying to push towards a fully digital live service route that nobody wants. And we've been getting so many live service games in the past few months, if not the past year, and things have just been getting even worse. And so many games within that time frame ended up ending dead on arrival and nobody played it, and or the game just shut down because everybody realized that those live service games are a pile of dog shit. Games like Anthem, Marvel's Avengers, Redfall, X Defiant, Conquered, you name it. It just seems like these companies are trying to force everyone into a live service genre that nobody wants, and they're trying to force consumers to go into a digital only future, but that has been received so poorly, and there's been so much backlash surrounding that, and people are starting to get sick and tired of it, and people are starting to catch on like, damn, if these live service games and these digital only games are not going to work properly, or if they're not going to last longer than 6 months, then why should I bother buying this or playing it when I can just get a physical copy of the game and not rely on the servers? But even then, man, like that's starting to have a little bit of drawbacks as well because it just seems like it's starting to get more and more harder just to find physical copies of video games that we like nowadays. Now, look, don't get me wrong, there are still physical copies out there in like your local game stores, like whether it be GameStop, Walmart, Target, you name it. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it just seems like more companies are trying to push towards this digital only route and it is just not working out too well for them. I mean, even with games like Conquered, that also had a physical copy, that was a live service, that was like $40. It ended up surviving 2 weeks and the game flopped, and it is a literal paperweight for anyone that still has the physical copy of said game. Unless some companies give the game like an offline mode so they can have their people play the game whenever they want. I just don't really see that happening going forward because most of these companies want more control over their players and more control over the consumer. But in reality, people are starting to catch up with these marketing scams and tactics, and people are getting sick and tired of this. And if the game servers don't work properly, then how are you going to get access to your digital games? Like Fortnite, for example, or Multiverses, or Brawlhalla, for example, games that are digital only. How are you going to get access to those digital games if the servers shut down? You won't. Which brings me up to my next point, Sony. So, for those of you who do not know, which I don't know how you missed the news, it was literally impossible. It took the internet by storm earlier last week. But for those of you who don't know, let me catch you up to speed real quick. Sony basically had a massive server outage for 24 hours from Friday night all the way into Saturday, and people were getting furious at Sony, and then Sony came out with one of the most BS PR speaks on Twitter, basically saying, "Oh, hey, the servers are back up, everyone. Don't you worry. We'll give you 5 extra days of free PlayStation Plus for anyone that already has a PlayStation Plus membership with us. Which, in a way, is literally dog shit and it's nothing compared to what the 2011 Sony outage had. Because the equivalent of what Sony just did lately was piss poor, and everyone is screaming at Sony, and they are absolutely enraged at Sony's outage, and rightfully so, especially because their server outage was so bad you could barely get access to your video games. Even if you had your console set as the primary console, even if you had digital games, you still could not really get access to most of those games. I mean, the same argument can be even made for Xbox or Nintendo, or even PC, for example. Like, what would happen if the Microsoft servers had a massive outage, or if Nintendo had a massive outage for their servers and their games were only digital? You could not get access to your games. So, game preservation is basically on a death creep, and people are getting worried and scared because we do not want a digital only future. People like me, we actually support physical media still to this day, and we actually like to have control over our products because if we buy a product, we should have the right to own that product, whether it be a physical copy or a digital copy. You should still have the right to own what you buy regardless. So it makes me think, how are we going to preserve video games going forward as we slowly approach this digital only future? Are we going to have to resort to video game emulation so people can try to play Bloodborne on PC or play one of their older games like Ocarina of Time through game emulation? Or could we play one of the older games like Black Ops 2 just to go through the campaign through game emulation? Are we going to have to get like some kind of Gears of War emulator? Or are we going to have to resort to pirating video games just to preserve the games we want? Which definitely seems to be more reasonable now that I realize it, because if companies don't want us owning their products, then pirating these products isn't stealing them. Think about this for a minute. If you buy a product, regardless, like if you buy a video game, like let's say Horizon, for example, you folks can't tell, but in my hands right now, I have a physical copy of Elden Ring for the PS5, and I can play this game whenever I want. I don't need a digital copy or a live service to keep me interested. I can play the physical copy of this game whenever I want. Even though I have a digital copy for my PS4, but I still had a physical copy for the PS5 because Elden Ring is just that fun. I'm just going to put this back on my shelf real quick. There we go. But it makes me worried. If companies don't want us owning their video games, whether it be a physical or a digital copy, then why should we support these companies if they're not going to let us own their products? I don't know if someone made up this saying on the internet, but I saw somewhere online where somebody had a quote saying, if buying isn't owning, then piracy is not stealing. Because if corporate companies are just going to take your games away whenever they want, then us as a consumer should have the right to pirate the games and take it back to preserve our games. A good example, Ubisoft. You all remember the massive controversy surrounding Ubisoft and their statement of gamers should get comfortable not owning their games. And trust me, I made several videos about Ubisoft, and I absolutely roasted the hell out of them for that statement. If Ubisoft wants gamers to get comfortable not owning their games, Ubisoft needs to get comfortable not owning a company, especially because their recent track record shows it, because they shut down games like The Crew that people even had physical copies for, even though it was an online game. They shut it down, and people are still furious at Ubisoft because of it. Even Ubisoft's latest track record in 2024, where their last few major games, Skull and Bones, X Defiant, Star Wars Outlaws, all underperformed badly. And there have been reports about, I think Ubisoft was originally going to be bought out at some point because their company has been taking a massive hit, and I think Tencent was going to buy them at some point. That was just rumors I heard on the internet. Maybe it's true, maybe it's false, I could be wrong, but that's just what I've heard on the internet. That those are just rumors I heard. But anyway, back to the topic of hand. Video game preservation is basically on its deathbed, and these companies do not want us to support these physical copies of video games anymore. And it makes me worried because what if the servers go down? If we have a digital copy and if there's another outage like Sony had, then people won't get access to their games. And it makes me scared for some people because there are some amazing games that need to be recognized. Games like Elden Ring, games like Baldur's Gate 3, games like Black Ops 2, for example, all deserve to be recognized, and they all have physical copies. Well, except for Baldur's Gate 3. I still have yet to find a physical copy for that game. I heard it was supposed to be only digital, but I saw somewhere online where Baldur's Gate 3 had a physical copy, but it was part of like some kind of collector's edition or something like that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there are so many beloved video games out there that need to be preserved, and these companies do not want people to own their games. Now, look, I'm not trying to say all companies are trying to follow this mentality of, oh, don't own our video games. No, because there are some companies that do care and want people to experience and have fun with their video games, like Larian Studios with Baldur's Gate 3, companies like Massive Monster with Cult of the Lamb. And yes, I have a physical copy of Cult of the Lamb in my hand right now. I just pulled it off my shelf. And as a matter of fact, I was thinking about going back through this game and playing it again because it was fun. I talked about how it was having issues last year, but I'm pretty sure they all got ironed out by now. But there are even indie developer companies that still care about game preservation and they want people to have fun. The future of the gaming industry, it's starting to get really scary, especially because we're heading towards this digital only future. And it makes me worried for people going forward. Like, how are we going to preserve video games if we're going to be going to a digital only future? It's basically not going to happen. You'll remember how the Xbox 360 servers were finally shut down? So, if you had any games digitally, I can only imagine the nightmare that people are going through, because if they deleted a game by accident and they want to try to reinstall it, I don't think you'll be able to because their servers are shut down unless you're connected to some kind of internet, but even then the servers for the 360 are shut down, so I don't think you'll be able to reinstall those Xbox 360 games unless you had like a physical copy and you can preserve it. But yeah, man, this digital only future is starting to get scary. I mean, say what you will about Nintendo, but at least they're still sticking with physical media with their gaming cartridges, and at least they still care about game preservation. Even though they hate the fact that people emulate their games, at least they still make physical copies for their video games. Now look, don't get me wrong. Half of the time, Nintendo as a company fucking sucks, but the other half of the time, Nintendo does a fantastic job of releasing video games because 90% of Nintendo games are usually bangers. But the other 10%, they're usually not that well received. I mean, games like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, for example, are part of that 10% where it's just a big disappointment. But games like Metroid Prime Remastered, for example, and games like Super Mario Wonders for the Switch, those games are part of the 90% bangers. But other than that, I mean, that's basically all I got for this video. So I was originally gonna make a video about me talking about the Nintendo Switch 2, but after seeing the shit show that Sony has went through last week, and after doing some serious thinking to myself when it comes to game preservation, I just figured I'd get on here and make a video talking about the future of the game industry. So maybe in my next video, I'm gonna upload the video about me talking about the Switch 2, giving my thoughts and opinions on it, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes. So with this being said, thank you everyone for watching and for listening. I apologize for rambling, and until next time, I'm talking about the future of the gaming industry and how it's still worrying me. And I'll see you all later.